Good afternoon. Last session of today, episode of today, and this one about, well, probably my favorite topic, or maybe that's JavaScript variables in general, I don't know. Imposition. So we're going to talk about imposition. If you thought that it would be impossible to come up with more things to do in imposition in pdfToolbox, then by the end of this session I will hopefully have proven you wrong. It was possible, and I'm going to show you all about it. And I know that at least for some of you, you've already played with pdfToolbox 16 because it is on the website, so you can just download it, and you've experimented with the imposition functionality. But maybe I can show you some new things as well, even if you've already played with it. So let's see. First thing is Switch. I talked a little bit about Switch yesterday in the session, but I want to repeat some of what I said then and give some additional accents because it is important for imposition. So what I said yesterday was that the current apps for pdfToolbox are using the classic Switch scripting, and that we have new apps that are based on Node.js, and they implement a bunch of missing functionality. They also implement all of the new functionality in pdfToolbox 16. More importantly, when it comes to imposition, is that where we used to have 5 callas apps or pdfToolbox related apps on the App Store, there are only 3 of those left in, well, this release of the apps. And for one of them that is not really important, the convert colors was already marked as deprecated, so you shouldn't have been using it anymore, and it can easily be replaced by profiles instead. But for pdfToolbox Impose, that is much more relevant. And of course, the fact that the app doesn't exist doesn't mean that you can't use the functionality. It has been merged into actions, but you will have to take some action, no pun intended, to make sure that your flows are updated and are using the newest functionality. Specifically, in terms of transition, what you need to do is you need to replace pdfToolbox impositions, so that app specifically, with either pdfToolbox actions. There is a new action for the impose functionality in there. Or of course, if you want to build your imposition step into a process plan, then you can run that process plan using pdfToolbox profiles. So you have 2 ways of migrate from the impositions app to the profiles or actions app. If you look at the Impose app that existed up to now, then you will see that there was a way to run a pre-flight profile before you did imposition. And that is no longer an option with the Actions app. There you just specify the imposition configuration. You can't specify this kind of pre-processing profile, but of course in a process plan you can quite easily do that. So if you were using this functionality to first run a pre-flight profile and then do imposition using the Impose app, then you need to build a process plan that does these steps and then use it that way. Or of course, you could build it into a switch flow by first having pdfToolbox profiles and then pdfToolbox actions for the 2 steps. But it probably makes more sense to combine it into a single process plan. So that's what I wanted to mention about Switch, just so that when we start talking about imposition and you're using that in Switch, that you don't encounter surprises there. Second topic is documentation, also quite important, and there is a completely new chapter for that, and I just wanted to open that up in a browser. So it used to be called Impose, it is now called Imposition, but of course it talks about the same type of functionality. And when you look at that, you'll see that it is a quite long chapter now, 23 articles in total. The whole chapter structure has changed a little bit, and there are quite a few new articles in there as well. The reason the whole chapter was changed is because we wanted to highlight the fact that there are 3 different ways to do imposition. Simple imposition, where you don't do configurations, and then you have the old style stuff and the JavaScript stuff, so that is now better explained. And then the chapter focuses on the JavaScript imposition, as you can see in all these articles. The old style imposition articles are still there. They have largely not been modified, but on the JavaScript side, there is quite a bit of new content that you can use. And one of the things that is also done, and let me see if I have that also on the slide, I believe so. One of the things that was also done is that one of these articles explains what you can find in a new library, and that library is not standard in pdfToolbox, but you can download it from that documentation article and import in pdfToolbox. And what it does is it gives you not full imposition configurations, but it gives you, if I switch to pdfToolbox for a second, and then we go here. So I have a list of imposition configurations that are not production ready. That is what I wanted to say. They are not production ready, but they are examples that should show you specific features of how to work with imposition. The first one, for example, let me show you some stuff. That's not the one that I wanted to open, actually. I should make sure I have the right one selected. So if I do this again and we go to the first one here, and then I do edit. So the first one is essentially an explanation kind of the framework that you have to create an impose object, and then I have to add a sheet definition, and with that sheet definition I have to add a sheet, and then I return that to pdfToolbox. So not something that you would use in production, but something that you can use to understand what the functions are that are involved and what the objects are that are involved, and the examples become more complex and show other techniques as you go through the library, including some things that you have not seen before and that we will talk about quite soon. So if you're interested in starting from scratch, go to the 30th chapter in the pdfToolbox manual. That is the imposition chapter, and then you can read about all of this stuff and download the library that I'm talking about here to get going. So let's get back here. Of course, let's be honest, no one likes to read documentation in the first place. So isn't there a better way than having to read a bunch of documentation? I would be very sad if you don't read the documentation, because I've written a lot of this new chapter. But if you want to make me sad, then I will show you a different way of accomplishing more or less the same thing. For a while now, if you wrote JavaScript in pdfToolbox, there was a way to insert JavaScript objects and JavaScript snippets, and that is still the case. So these JavaScript objects are that brings up a dialog box, and there you have the list of all of the objects that pdfToolbox inserts into the JavaScript world. You have the app object and the app.doc object that represents the document, and so on. You also had JavaScript snippets, where you have some examples of JavaScript structures and where you can also put your own snippets. And those things can be quite useful, especially this JavaScript objects functionality I use all the time when I write something with pdfToolbox, because then you don't have to remember exactly what the syntax is. You just select what you want, and then that gets inserted into the script that you're writing. So why not do the same thing for imposition functionality? And that is exactly what you have in pdfToolbox 16, and rather than talk about it, I want to, of course, also show this. So I have a file open, but what I want to do is I want to create a new imposition configuration. So I'm just going to say new, and that gives me an empty JavaScript imposition config. And now the question is, how do I start? And what I said before was, well, you go to the documentation page and you read what you need to do there. But I don't want to do that. So what I'm going to do is go to imposition objects, and that gives me a nice list of things. And you see some object definitions at the top, and then there is a list of functions that you can use for the impose object. So I'm starting from scratch, so I would want to start an imposition. That means I need an impose object, and I'm going to use the one that has defaults in there. And so I can either add or just double click, and that puts a snippet of code into my JavaScript imposition configuration. There is some, there are some comments to that, so I can get started, and you can see that the idea is that I create an impose object, and part of this default object, and probably the only thing that is very frequently used, is the units I want to use, and that is set to millimeter. And then here I should do some stuff as the comment says, so I will remove that, and then at the end the imposition object is returned. Yeah. So this is nice because I didn't have to remember what this object is called and how this works and so on. I can just get going from there. Now, the next thing that you need in imposition is an imposition sheet definition. And so I could look at what are my options here, and I see something that is called add sheet def with a width and a height. I have the same thing with a width and a height and a unit. So I already set a default unit, so the unit is not what I want. I'm just going to take this one. And now I have to be a little bit careful. The idea of this snippets repository is not that you can just copy paste stuff and that it all will magically work. You do sometimes have to do a little bit of work, so you have to pay attention. It creates a sheet definition. The function uses a width and height. Now, these two things are not defined in my script, and now I have a choice. I could say, oh, I'm just going to put it in here. So probably if it's an A4 landscape, then it would be 297 and so on. So I could do it that way, or I could choose to define it here and say sheet width is 297, and then the sheet height is 210. Yeah. So this functionality, this snippet functionality, is not going to write the whole imposition configuration for you. It's not AI. It's imposition intelligence, not artificial intelligence this session. So it's not going to write the whole thing for you, but it is going to show you the syntax that you need and make it much simpler for you to connect all of these pieces together. And I don't want to write a complete example from this, but I could now say, oh, now I have a sheet definition. Now I need to create a sheet for that. And then I go back to snippets and I insert the imposition.addSheet, whatever it's called. It will tell you what it's called and what the syntax for that particular function is. And you could keep using the snippet functionality until you have the imposition configuration that you want and everything works. Good. And so if you use that, you might get away with not using the documentation all that much, which is what we all want in the end. Okay. Next thing. I'm using the snippet functionality and then I'm trying to run this imposition configuration, and what happens? Well, obviously you get some kind of mistake somewhere, at least that would probably happen if it were me. And then you need to figure out what the mistake is. And in pdfToolbox 15 or before, the only thing I could do was I have my configuration, and then I could say test, for example, and then it hopefully gives me an error that makes clear where the problem is, and I can fix that and then run it again and find the next problem and so on and so on. Yeah, that is what typically would happen. What is new in pdfToolbox 16, and you can already see it in the dialog there is this new checkbox that is in the configuration window called Show Evaluation Results. And when I switch that on, I get an additional part to the dialog box that can help me a little bit in figuring out what is going wrong. So let me switch to probably this one. And then, no, I want one of the existing ones for this. And then I could say edit. So this is the dialog that you know. I now have the show evaluation results at the right. And then when I click that, it opens the evaluation pane for me on the right-hand side. In JavaScript variables, you also have this. And in JavaScript variables, it's at the bottom. Here, it made more sense to put it on the right, given that you're writing a bunch of JavaScript, and then you also want to show something on the right-hand side that picks up enough or takes up quite a bit of space. And because most of our screens are now wider than higher, this made more sense. And so it shows me two things. The simplest is this console.log. So if you look on the left-hand side, there is a console.log statement, and you can use console.log or console.info. There's a few ways you can do this. And then on the right-hand side, it says, well, what you write to the console. And why is this interesting? Well, it's interesting because I could now, for example, I have the num pages thing here. So somewhere in the middle of my imposition configuration where I'm not quite sure that I'm doing the right thing, I could say console.log and then maybe this num pages variable. And then on the right-hand side, I can see that that is 1. So for my test document, there is only one page. That was an easy one, of course, but it means that in more complex scripts where you're not sure what you may have calculated, and maybe if the problem was something went wrong with a calculation of a particular variable, I can now easily write stuff to the console without having to run a test to see whether it works or not, and hopefully find the problem sooner than by using test mode alone. You can also go to this and this tab is called runlist debugger. What this shows is the object that is returned to pdfToolbox as a result of your JavaScript imposition. And so all of the code that I have on the left builds this imposition object, and that imposition object determines what pdfToolbox eventually is going to do in terms of imposition. And so now I can see what is in there. What has pdfToolbox understood from all of the functions and so on that I'm using? And so I could, for example, see what the slots are that I have created. There is one here, and the placement in that slot is CC, which stands for center horizontal, center vertical. I can see what the position of that slot and the width and height of that slot is, and so on. And I can go through this and figure out what all the things are that were calculated. So all of these are still slots. And then I have a definition of these sheets, and something that you do not recognize because we haven't talked about it yet, a whole array full of decorations. Yeah, and we'll talk about that in a second, obviously. So this gives me a nice insight into what has been created, and again can help with figuring out whether my imposition configuration makes sense, whether I made any mistakes, and so on. And hopefully that, again, reduces the amount of time you have to go back to the documentation, and maybe also the amount of times you need test mode in order to, well, try out the configuration that you are creating. Okay, so if you have things that you would like in here, or things where you think, oh, it would be much nicer if I could also, we also have some ideas about this, but don't be afraid to raise the issue and send in a feature request, or if you're coming to one of the PDF camps, for example, by all means ask questions and see if we can do more things to make this useful. But let's talk about this thing that I've already hinted at twice now without explaining what it is, and that is imposition decorations. And you saw that array called decorations in the imposition object that was created. And so the question is, what are these things and what can I do with them? This is something that you've seen on LinkedIn if we are connected there, and you've seen this pass in your feed, or in the callas software feed that had a version, I was going to say a version without penguins, but this also doesn't have penguins, to everyone's surprise. But this is something that was created from an imposition configuration. And if you have worked with imposition before, then you know in pdfToolbox 15, this is not possible. Not with just imposition. You would need to run imposition and then follow it up with one or more place content fix-ups in a process plan, for example. Because imposition can add some text, but that's where it stops. It cannot add lines or rectangles or circles or barcodes or any of the other things to a PDF document. So imposition decorations allow you to do these things. And it is limited to the JavaScript imposition configurations. Yeah? What I already said also when I talked about documentation is you have these old style scripts for imposition. The whole chapter has been rewritten with JavaScript as the main way to do imposition, and that is just what it is. This is the more modern, it's the way things are progressing, and you can expect new functionality to be added to the JavaScript imposition, but not necessarily to old style imposition configurations. The old style imposition configurations are not going away, they will continue to work, but some of the new things will only be available in JavaScript. All of these decorations mimic some of the place equivalents. So place text, place circle, ellipse, place rectangle, place line, place barcode. Yeah. There are more of these place something fix-ups, but the ones you have there are the only ones that are currently supported. They use, and I will show that as well, they use the same properties as the fix-ups that they correspond to. So if I use these decorations in a JavaScript configuration, then they would use all the properties. I say place line, well, that would use all of the properties that the place line fix-up would also use. And so it's easy to know what they can do, and it's easy to play with what values could I use, because you can just use a place line fix-up and experiment until it does what you want. And that is also then these settings you can use in the JavaScript configuration. And maybe important, it doesn't follow the slot system. So in Imposition so far, what happened was that you create a sheet, and then on that sheet you create a slot, and a slot is a rectangular area on the sheet somewhere with a certain X and Y origin and a certain width and height, and then you place content in that slot, and that content could be text or it could be pages. These decorations do not follow the slot system. The main reason for that is that, to begin with, they were already more flexible, and they follow the place line, place text, and so on fix-ups. And we wanted to make all of the properties, all of the parameters that you have for these fix-ups to also be available in the Imposition configuration. And that was very difficult to merge with the slot system, so they don't use that. They are independent of slots. So let's have a look at that. And then I could say we're going to look at, well, this fill pages is not a bad one. It already uses that. So let's do edit. And I'm going to switch off the evaluation results for now. What I have here is a JavaScript configuration, and it will create some slots on the fly and so on. And most of this stuff you should recognize. I think everything to this point is easily recognizable, things that you could do in pdfToolbox 15. But then I have this line Imposition place rectangle, and that is new. All of these decoration functions in JavaScript are called place and then the name of the thing that they place. So you have place line, place circle. Is it place circle or place ellipse? I'm not sure yet. We'll look in the snippets in a second. It's a nice feature. Place barcode, place text. So you have all of these names. And if you want to know what they are, I can go, as I said, I can go here under the I button and then go to the snippets. And here at the bottom, you see all of them. Place barcode, place ellipse, place line, place rectangle, and place text. And I'm not going to do it now because my cursor is somewhere in the middle of some piece of JavaScript, and I'm going to end up with something very weird. But if I would double click on place barcode, that will place in my JavaScript code an example of this place barcode function. And it would also give me an example of the parameters that I can use, and I can then tweak these parameters. So that's, again, the easiest way of using this specifically for these functions, because they have so many properties. And you can see that here with place rectangle. What they use is a sheet ID. So I've created an imposed sheet, and that gives me an ID for that sheet in the Imposition language. And then I pass an object, a very long object, with all of the properties for the rectangle that I want to place. And as you read through them, they should not be that strange. I have whether I want it to be a spot color, whether I want what color I want for this thing, how high it is, how wide it is, where it should be positioned. rectangle one uses position of the center, X and Y, so horizontal and vertical. Again, if you go to the place rectangle fix-up, you will see that that fix-up has all of these same properties. So the same way the fix-up works, this is also going to work. And I can modify any of these properties, and that's all you have to do. So I've called Imposition place rectangle, I've specified the properties that I want, and that is going to add the rectangle to my imposed sheet. Some of these fix-ups have a way to state whether the object should be here, this one, the very long one, whether the newly created decoration should be at the front or at the back. Not all of them have it. Again, we just mirror the properties of the fix-up, and maybe this is missing from a fix-up, and maybe you come up with a use case where you would need that, and then you need to tell us, and then we might add it in a future version. But so some of them have that, and in that case, I can choose whether my rectangle would be the top element or whether it would be the bottom element. And you could say, yes, but shouldn't decorations like marks and so on, shouldn't they always be in the background when I create an imposition? Well, I can probably come up with examples where the decoration that I create could overlap with imposed content and where I want it to be at the top. So it's up to the use case, and we give you the property and you can decide what you want. And so this one uses place rectangle, and then there is an old style add text, and this could be a little bit confusing, so I want to draw your attention to that. In the pdfToolbox 15 and before imposition configurations, you already had add text, just like you had add page, and that was able to put text somewhere, but this is the old style. There is also a place text, and that is the new style decoration. So you can use both in this case. And because I didn't need anything that was very special, I just use add text for this one, but I could easily replace it with place text. And then I have a third one that is added, and that is a barcode. Let me see if I can get some more of its properties on screen here. So it's a barcode, and again, I can specify the color, whether I want a background or not, what the barcode parameters are. And that is something that you don't really know, but you will learn more about that in the first session tomorrow when we talk about actions and amongst other things about the place barcode action. And then I also have some where I say this is the value that I want to put in there. So that would be this line, and it is going to be an EAN 13 barcode in this example. So again, all of the properties that you're used to from place barcode can also be specified here. In fact, and that is something that is good to know, if you look at this configuration, this is completely, what happens here in this imposition configuration is completely equivalent to a process plan where I have a step that does imposition and where I would then create or add a fix-up for place rectangle and a fix-up for place barcode. Yeah? If I run that process plan or I run this imposition configuration, the end result, the final PDF that I get, would be exactly identical. That is internally what also happens. pdfToolbox looks at this imposition object that I build, and then it says, okay, so I need to run imposition first, and then it creates fix-ups, the place, rectangle, and so on, fix-ups on the fly, and it runs those on the PDF that comes out of imposition. And that gives me the final PDF. Yeah. Why is this so nice then? Well, it's nice because I had to create a process plan for that in the past, and mostly because in some cases, Sometimes it's trivial what I want to do. I want to just add a small black rectangle in a corner somewhere. Good, I can do that in a process plan. It's not very difficult. But there are definitely cases where you want to place these decorations somewhere in the layout, maybe related to the slots that you're creating and so on. So you're doing a bunch of calculations, and if you do this in a process plan, you would kind of have to redo these calculations to then know where your fix-ups would need to place their information. And so you would have to store that in variables and then use variables in the fix-ups and so on. It's a mess. You have the logic separated across multiple things. Well, here, the only thing I do is create one imposition configuration and I get immediately the final result. So that should make it, in some scenarios, much easier to make this happen and create a configuration like this. Of course, it also means that you just have the JavaScript run list and the sheet config, and that you can easily use them in the actions configurator, the new impose action that you have in there, and that's it. Okay. So, then I just said, well, sometimes you want to do an imposition, and I do all kinds of calculations, and then that imposition is part of a process plan, and maybe I want to know where all of these slots were placed because I want to make decisions based on that. And how do you do that? Well, what also happens in pdfToolbox 16, and you might not need it as often because of this decoration functionality that I was just talking about, and the fact that you can now do a lot more in the imposition configurations themselves. But in 16, when you do imposition, the result of that imposition is saved in the app.doc object. And that is very similar to something that already happened. When you run pre-flight in a process plan, then you have in this app.doc.result object, you have the result of that pre-flight step. And that allows you to look at the hits that were generated by pre-flight checks and so on. Yeah, so that already happened. And now in app.doc.result.imposition, you also get the result of a previous imposition step. How does that work? Well, I want to show you, of course. So let me see if I can show that. I think I actually don't know which of the two it is, but we'll see. I guessed right. So here I have an action, and if I look at what action it is an impose action. So that is the first step in my process plan, and then the second step in my process plan is a script. And that script then looks at that imposition object. And so in there, I'm putting that in a variable, a local variable, and it says last imposition. Of course, you have to first do the imposition, and then you have a script immediately afterwards. That's the same that works for pre-flight. And then I can, for example, remember the sheets that were created, maybe the number of sheets that were created. So if my imposition step creates 3 imposed sheets, then now app.vars.number of sheets would be 3. And maybe that is important to me because I want to add a page number, although I could do that during the imposition step. Or I want to look at how many imposed sheets did I make, because I know that I have to have in total something that is divisible by 16. And then now maybe I add blank pages. I could also do that in the imposition step. So in many cases, there are ways to fix things already in imposition, but you have the information now in this result.imposition variable. And so I can also look at a specific sheet, and then I could look at how many slots have I created. So number of first page slots would give me the number of slots that were created. And then I could also get the number of decorations that are created. And because I have access to these slots and decorations, I can see where they were created, what their width and height was, what their position is. And maybe I could now have something where I add additional marks based on these slots that were created during an imposition step. So that gives you one more way that you can work with this imposition information in a process plan, for example.